I'm sure many of you belong to what's called the sandwich generation, and these are people who are still raising their own families while also looking after the care and well-being of their parents. This is an enormous responsibility, and at some point, difficult decisions may need to be made. Can your older loved ones live independently? When can they use a little help? Will they need to move to assisted living? My first guest is here to help you reach those decisions, and it begins with a conversation. Lori Wengerd is the owner of Home Care Assistance. Lori, it's nice to have you
Gail.
here.
Thank you.
And this is the third in our series of how we talk with our parents and make sure that we get their wishes. And one of those things that we've talked about is the fact that you need to start that conversation. How do you?
Boy, that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
I always, if you're the older adult that's listening to us today, I encourage you to take control of the situation. Call a meeting together of your support group and say, it could be fun over, Danish and coffee, and say, here's what I want, and here's my plans for the future, and here's where my finances are, and here's what I plan to do with my power of attorney. So that it's really empowering if you do that yourself.
I was going to say, so take control early on, and while you still, as dementia may set in, feel like you can express those wishes and have someone listen to you.
Right.
You mentioned, though, that it's different with different people at different ages, so you can't really go by age when it comes to talking to your parents about what they want.
Yeah, I think sometimes you will notice a crisis point or something has changed in your parents or in the older, adults in your life, and it's time then maybe to have that conversation. Obviously, if you have it early on, like you said, it's better, but there are other things that might force the conversation as well. So there are some good ground rules maybe for that conversation, and one thing I always recommend is not to treat it as an intervention. Don't sneak up with the whole family showing up on a Sunday to meet with your parents and to talk to them about it. But let them retain their dignity and control and just say, I love you and I want to make sure that we follow your wishes, but we have to first know what those are. So can we get together next week and kind of talk about it? And, just understand that it might not get completed in one meeting, that it might take a couple discussions, but at least get the conversation started so that everybody, can be empowered by the fact that you've all been in the same room hearing what those wishes might be.
So you mentioned a crisis point. But for some, there's other signs of when you need to start that conversation. So what are other signs besides a big crisis that should have parents and their children trying to get together to discuss?
Some signs are fairly obvious, and you might find that maybe your mom is just home from the hospital and was told not to use the stairs. So obviously, you have to have help. Most of the signs you'll see as people age that help is needed are kind of a lot more subtle. We find that parents of any age do not want their children to know that they're struggling. So they're going to maybe hide things, hide the way they feel, hide the way they act. But you can kind of observe, especially when you're home for the holidays, on how things might be going. For example, is the house maybe, is there piles of mail where there never were piles of mail before? Are bills going unpaid? Are your parents more tentative in how they walk? Do you notice them grabbing furniture or sitting down more? Because if people are afraid of falling, they're going to restrict their activities, which means they're going to be more likely to fall in the future. Is there a little bit of memory loss? And it doesn't always have to be Alzheimer's. But memory loss can impact them remembering doctor's appointments, remembering to take medications. So you really want to just look for those subtle things that indicate there's a change of some sort taking place.
You mentioned the holidays and a good time to observe parents. Is that also a time to start that conversation?
I think if the timing is right, what's nice about holidays is a lot of us are spread out all over the country. And so if you want as many of the family members in one place, sometimes the holidays are the right time to do it. Maybe not Christmas morning, let's talk about that, because it's going to be very hard for the older adults to have this conversation. So, maybe at least start the discussion, say, let's talk later in the year or in the next couple weeks. But that is a good time to observe.
You say it's never too soon to start that conversation. If your parent, the older senior, doesn't bring it up, how should the children bring it up or someone else in the family?
I think it's best if it doesn't follow a crisis. Obviously, if it does, that's easy. Dad, I notice you have a lot of bruises. Have you been falling? And he, understand that he might get defensive about that. But say, let's not talk about it today. Let's get together for coffee and just see what you think you might need help with. But if it's not a crisis like that, again, just saying, we love you a lot, and it's no secret we're all getting older. Let's sit down together and talk about what we might need to do.
And the interesting part you brought up too was that children need to listen to what their parents want.
Boy, make sure that you do. I mean, the difference between a parent and a child is that you don't have control over your parents' decisions as much as you'd like to, for the most part. Understand that they've proven their capabilities. They've earned the right to make decisions, and allow them to still be in charge. And don't try to go in and take control like you would if it were a 17-year-old.
It's so interesting that we have to think this way on both ends, and yet if we can start these conversations, gosh, it can make things so much more seamless as you go there.
We find that families are.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
I want to make sure that people know what you're talking about with this little book here.
I just, our very first interview where we talked about, the whole concept of being happy to 102, I kind of wanted to come back to that because while this conversation that we're having today can seem kind of unpleasant or maybe something you want to avoid, there's always good news to aging. And the fact is, I just want, I want people to take comfort in knowing that 2/3 of their lifespan and their health span are the decisions that they make in their everyday life, their lifestyle choices. So take comfort in that fact that you do have control over how you age.
I want to make sure that everyone knows that we've had all 3 segments, and this is the 3rd in Journey on Aging, and they're all on our website. So we want to make sure that if people have missed the first couple with you, Lori, that they can go back and check on that. And we want to end this, as you say, on a good note. The fact that, yes, both sides can come together, and it can have a happy ending.
Right. We find that families who have this conversation really can move on a lot easier. They're able to, get that out of the way and feel satisfied that the family understands their wishes and they can move on. A plan A and a plan B is always a good thing.
Lori, thanks. This has been wonderful information.
Well, thank you, Gail.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.